on in April of 2025. So if someone is watching it later, the information is correct as of today. So let me just turn off my video and go back to my slides. Okay, so I'll start with the little bit of introduction. My name is Mubarak Mustafa, and I am a senior consultant with Asset Solutions. I have over 30 years of experience in industrial automation and control systems and cybersecurity. I've spent most of my life in industrial facilities, onshore, offshore, programming, configuring, installing DCS, SCADA, safety systems, and all. And for the past 10 years or so, I've been working in cybersecurity domain, and I have a few credentials to go by with my profile. A couple of things that I like to say up front is obviously this discussion, whatever we're going to present today, is based on my own experience, my own background. Like any complex topic, OT cybersecurity is also quite complex. You don't have to agree with my opinion, and I'd be happy to discuss any difference of opinion in a respectful manner on any forum. So feel free to disagree, feel free to ask questions so that we can all learn together. All right, so the topic today, obviously, we know that it's about the asset discovery versus asset management in OT environment. So first, I'd like to just establish a baseline on what we mean by OT environment. If any of you has spent any time outside, close to it in any industrial town, then you must recognize something like this. This is a very typical industrial facility. And those of you who have worked with control systems or the OT environment would recognize that you sometimes have, or almost always have, a control room with the operators sitting in front of computer screens, looking at the information on the screen and trying to control the plant. But on the back end of these fancy screens, there is a complex industrial control systems network with different components, servers, workstations, PLCs, SCADA, DCS, and all connected in usually in quite complex network environment. So you would find this kind of environment in, let's say, a refinery, a petrochemical complex, or other maybe fertilizer and all. You could also have some power plants, some substations, electrical environment connected over maybe some kind of a WAN to some control centers. So when we talk about OT, all of these different type of installations, they are considered as OT environment. Similarly, if it's a SCADA environment where there are PLCs and RTUs and all connected over LAN, WAN environment to a central location where the operators are monitoring or controlling the assets. So this is typically what OT environment is. Examples of OT systems, just to make sure that everybody is aligned about what we are talking about, are DCS, safety systems, SCADA systems, PLC, RTU, fire and gas, substation, power control systems, even building management systems, smart city, IIoT, all these things are considered as OT systems. In a nutshell, all electronic and computer systems or devices utilized by any kind of industrial facility to operate safely is typically considered an OT system. So now that we have established what OT systems are, let's talk for a few minutes about change management in industrial environment. So change management is a very, very, I guess, well-established and a very important concept in industrial environment. And in a nutshell, what this is a formal process to control changes. Most of you may have heard of the term MOC, management of change. Change management or management of change is sometimes used interchangeably. But in a nutshell, what it is that for any kind of change in the industrial facility, in the industrial environment, the first step is to design and document the change. So whatever change needs to happen, it is supposed to be designed by qualified personnel. It is documented what change will be made, sometimes even the how part, how it will be made, and then you get approval for that. Once the approval is obtained, then the change is implemented. And once the change is implemented, after that, the final so-called as-built documentation is updated. Anyone who has spent any time in an industrial facility would know what as-built is and how painful it is to make sure that the as-builts are updated in a timely manner. Because if you don't have a well-documented status of your facility, then forget about your ability to manage or operate that facility safely. So this is a very typical MOC or change management concept in the industry. Now, in order to elaborate, because if any one of you are from IT or non-industrial environment, it's kind of hard to understand how rigid or how, I guess, important it is to follow the MOC process. I'll just give an example of what would happen if you need to make a change in, let's say, any industrial equipment. So you have this facility with a lot of valves and pipes and a lot of instrumentation that is controlling the flow of different fluids from one part of the plant to another. And in most cases, or almost all cases, you have some kind of these things called field instrumentation. So these field instrumentation is basically sensors or controllers that are connected with the actual plant process to either monitor the different parameters of the plant process, or if there are any kind of control devices to control the plant itself. So for the sake of our example, we'll pick one, let's say it's a pressure transmitter, just for the sake of example, and see what process would be followed if you need to make a change to this pressure transmitter. So what we'll do is we'll show the concept of redlining. And as you can see, when I'm drawing on the screen, there's literally a red line on it as well. And this concept of redlining is very common, very commonly understood in the industrial environment, which means is that whatever change you need to make, first you look at the original documentation, the previously as-built documentation, and you take a red pen, red marker, or any kind of red, I guess, highlighter, and you mark all the changes that need to be made on that particular equipment or the device or the process. So if I need to move this, make any change to this valve, for example, first I need to mark that change on the, let's say this is a PNID. So first I will redline the change on the PNID, and then I'll take it to the next step. In case of our pressure transmitter, the example that we gave, there is an instrument data sheet for this pressure transmitter with all the different parameters that are associated with that device. So I'm taking the example of this particular parameter over here, that somebody needs to make the change from 400 to 300. It's not as simple as you just going out there in the field, in the plant, and connecting with this device and making the change. First, you have to redline it on your instrument data sheet. You have to highlight the change that needs to be made to that particular parameter. So this one is the first step, that you document what change needs to be made to the device. Once you have documented it, and obviously this is a very simple example, but in a lot of cases this can take weeks or even months, because multiple type of engineers, multiple departments may be involved to decide what change needs to be made. But ultimately, the change is documented in a highlighted manner, either in a red line or in some other format. Once the change is documented, then the next step is to get the approvals. So you may need multiple approvals, not just one person. It could be your chief engineer or the maintenance department or the operations department or the supervisor or whoever is the appropriate stakeholder who is suitable to evaluate this change, both from environmental, from safety, from operations perspective. They will look at it and decide, is it okay for this change to be made or not? So once you have all these approvals, then you go to the next step of implementation. So the change is communicated to a suitable person who goes out to the site, to the field, and then of course, they use their equipment to connect to the transmitter and implement the change that has been approved. And the last step is that once the change is implemented, the technician or the engineer or the appropriate personnel would come back and confirm that the change has been implemented, and then the as-built will be updated. The original instrument data sheet or the original document will be formally updated with this new information that this is the current state of the configuration or the device or the installation. So this is the last step of updating as-builts. So, and this is something that is not just common, this is a must in any industrial environment. If you make a change without following this process, then you can get yourself into big trouble. So this is not something that is occasionally utilized. This is a must in any kind of industrial environment. So now that we understand what the MOC or change management process is, let's talk a little bit about why we need the change management. Obviously, the industrial facilities, they're complex. There is a lot of equipment, a lot of instruments, interconnected, interdependent. Any kind of uncontrolled changes would result in chaos. You need a systematic approach to make sure that the changes are appropriate, they are required, they are compatible with other equipment, they will not have any, for example, health, safety, environment, or even operation risk, and that there's not going to be any device or a system conflict. There's not going to be any unauthorized modifications. It helps you ensure accountability and traceability, who requested the change, who made the change, and who approved the change. And at the end of the day, maintaining operational integrity, making sure that the equipment performs the way it is supposed to. So in my previous example, if I input incorrect parameter for that transmitter, it may result in an unwanted operation or unwanted result from that particular instrument. So that's why this change management process is extremely critical. And the most important part over here is, I'll highlight that in a box, is that to mitigate the risks associated with either health, safety, environment, or plant operation. So now that we understand what the change management process is and why it is required, let's go into the other side of the world, which is the second part of our discussion today, asset discovery. So what is asset discovery? Before we talk about asset discovery, let's talk about what do we mean by assets, and especially in case of our discussion, we are talking about OT or ICS assets. I'm taking this example picture from a previous slide just to highlight that all of these interconnected systems, they are the different components of industrial control system. Most of these assets are connected to some kind of a network, and these assets could be servers, workstations, even printers, PLCs, RTUs, MTUs. If it's a DCS environment, then the DCS controllers, the DCS servers, communication servers, historians, database servers, even the networking equipment like network switches, routers, firewalls, gateways, if it's in, let's say, electrical substation, the IEDs, even in case of, in some cases, even field instruments are also considered from cybersecurity perspective as OT assets. So we're not just talking about the computers, because typically when we talk about asset inventory, a lot of people just think about laptops, servers, workstations. No, it's more than that. It's the complete infrastructure that builds the the OT environment, the ICS environment. So with all these OT assets, if we talk about asset discovery, what exactly is asset discovery? So in a simplest format, it would be some kind of a tool that would go through the network, figure out what the different assets are, maybe the make, model, the IP address, and some information. It would generate some kind of either a list of assets that it has found on the network, or in a lot of cases, generate some kind of a network architecture drawing. Typically, this is what the output of asset discovery is. And I'm using the word typically very carefully because there are some asset discovery tools that go beyond this. There are different types of asset discovery tools, but we're just trying to understand the concept over here. In the end, the process of asset discovery is to go out on the network and find out what assets, what computer assets, what control system assets, what network assets you have out there on the network. So if I try to define or try to characterize the asset discovery, basically it's a process of identifying what assets are present in the OT environment. It may include some asset details depending upon which asset discovery tool is being used. Some provide less details, some provide more details. The asset discovery tools may be passive or active. In a lot of cases, the OT environment, people get skeptical about active asset discovery, but I'm not going to go in that discussion if that's okay or not. Either way, you would have either active or passive scanning or discovery of assets to build the asset inventory. Importantly, it provides you as is picture of the current state. It tells you what the discovery tool has seen right now when it ran the discovery algorithm or scan. What is the picture on the network right now? They're very useful. I think asset discovery tools are awesome because they may provide the asset information very quickly, depending upon what type of tools you're using. It may be, within minutes or within hours, you will have a good picture of your asset information, your networks, depending upon the size and complexity of your OT environment. And also, in most cases, it requires limited efforts because the only effort or the most of the effort is required to install the asset discovery tool. The actual discovery or data collection is done automatically, either passively or actively, but in almost all cases, it is done automatically without much human intervention. In most cases, they cover assets connected to the network. So obviously there are network asset discovery tools. So if an asset is not connected to the network, the tool will not be able to see it. Unless you have some kind of agents installed, but I'm talking in a more general term. It may not give you the asset inventory of offline and disconnected assets. Obviously, if a computer is off or not even connected to the network, of course, it's not going to be able to detect it. Similarly, it may not include assets from inaccessible or unavailable network. If you have a simple, flat, one network, obviously the chances of discovering all the assets is very high. But if it's a large distributed environment, even within one plant, and especially if it's across multiple facilities, across different locations, different cities, different countries, then the ability of these tools to gather complete information becomes less and less. Some of these discovery tools, they provide either limited information about the assets and sometimes even incomplete information about the assets. I would even say sometimes incorrect information about the assets, depending upon the tool, because you are relying on the types of assets that you have out there are so diverse. Equipment from different OEMs, different backgrounds, different manufacturers, different types of equipment. Not every equipment responds to these discovery calls the same way. There are various communication protocols or discovery protocols that are used. So you will, in a lot of cases, get a lot of good information, but it may not necessarily be complete, and sometimes it may not be correct. Two of the most important characteristics of asset discovery concept is it provides the visibility after the change has happened. And we're going to pivot into the change management concept again. But obviously, if a computer is discovered on the network, that means it has already been installed on the network. Or let's say if the IP address of a computer, or even what software is installed on the computer, or what are the configuration parameters of the computer, if the discovery tool is discovering all that, that means that the change has already happened. So this is a very important point to remember. It's obvious, but it is something that we forget in the overall scheme of things, that asset discovery gives you the information after the change has happened. And that particular line is not aligned with the industrial MOC principles on its own, the way we have described in the previous few slides, that the change management process or MOC process in the industry requires you to manage the change before the change has happened. So these are some of the characteristics of asset discovery concept. I'd like to, before I get into the comparison of asset discovery and asset management, I'd like for you to imagine the concept of asset discovery being used elsewhere in the industrial operation, other than from cybersecurity perspective. So we'll take the same example of a change to the configuration of an instrument and imagine how it would look like if we were using the concept of asset discovery as opposed to asset management. So imagine that somebody goes out there, maybe manually, or there's some automation, but a person goes out there and looks at all the field instruments and collects the data of the configuration and then brings it back and updates the same documentation that we talked about before. So that means we're assuming that somebody makes the changes to the field instrumentation, and then weekly or monthly, whichever way, manually or automatically, you discover those changes and you bring it back and update the documentation. You would still have an updated as-built documentation, no doubt about that, but that violates the very basic principle of change management. This approach would never be allowed in any modern industrial facility, that the change is made first and then the documentation is updated to reflect the change. So if it is not acceptable in industrial operations otherwise, then how could it be acceptable as a replacement for asset management for OT cybersecurity? When we talk about OT cybersecurity, we're still talking about the same control systems with the same industrial environment. Then why is it acceptable to have asset discovery as a replacement of asset management, or synonymous to asset management, that, okay, because we have asset discovery, we are doing asset management? Why would that be acceptable? So even if you look at different international cybersecurity standards, whether it is ISA 62443, the NIST framework, NERCSIP in the US, even the local standards like in Saudi Arabia, the National Cybersecurity Authority, OTCC, or in Dubai, the DESC ICS standard, or in Abu Dhabi, the SIA standard. Any of these standards, if you look at them, they all require you to have asset management. And in a lot of cases, people think that it's the same as asset discovery. Yes, asset discovery is important, but change management as part of an overall cybersecurity management regime is what is actually required by these standards as well. So if you quickly look at the difference between asset discovery and asset management, I've listed a few of the features or comparison parameters, whatever you want to call it, and then listed, in my opinion, what the differences are between asset discovery and asset management. Obviously, the most basic one we talked about before is the timing, that in case of asset discovery, it provides you the information after the change has happened. But for asset management, the information is provided before the change has happened. If you are trying to assert any kind of control, then asset discovery does not give you any control because the change has already happened. But if you have a good asset management regime implemented, just like the MOC concept of a transmitter, you would have full control over what change is made, when it is made, who makes the change, and what will be the impact on all those things. If you talk about use cases of both, I feel that asset discovery is very useful in building initial inventory. It also provides very quick visibility because it does a scan and gives you a lot of useful information. It is also very useful for validation of inventory, that if I have my approved list of assets and I want to check whether what's on the network is exactly what I should have, then yeah, of course, I'm going to need asset discovery tool to do that. I'm not going to go out and manually check each and every device to compare with my baseline to validate if the actual implementation matches the required database. However, if you want to approach asset management from governance and lifecycle tracking, then you need to do asset management. Obviously, asset discovery is a reactive approach. Asset management is a proactive approach. You make the change, you decide what changes need to be made, you document them, you approve them, and then you implement them. From a risk management perspective, asset discovery only approach is high risk because if, let's say, an unauthorized computer has joined the network, asset discovery would detect it, but the computer has already joined the network. In case of asset management, the risk is relatively low because you would follow a process before anything is connected to the network. From efforts required perspective, definitely asset discovery requires less effort because you just install the discovery tool and you configure it to scan the network every 1 hour, 1 day, or whenever, and it automatically, in most cases, gives you what it sees on the network. In case of asset management, there is a lot of manual process. People kind of get scared with this word manual, but frankly, I showed you exactly how the industry works. If you have to make a change to a transmitter, you have to do so much manual work. You have to fill out so much paperwork that people get sick of it. But that's what the regime is implemented in the industry. Without that change management regime, you would have chaos in your industrial environment. Is it mandated by cybersecurity standards? Asset discovery is partially mandated, but not as a replacement of asset management. Asset management in most cases is required by different cybersecurity standards. And as we talked about before, that from coverage perspective, asset discovery would only cover connected networks. It would only cover connected device. Asset management would give you a complete picture of your OT environment. So with that, to summarize, while I've talked about lots of downsides of asset discovery, the conclusion is not that asset discovery is not useful. It plays a very important role in the overall cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity management framework. However, asset discovery is not a replacement of asset management. Asset management principles, just like the change management principles we talked about earlier in an industrial environment, they must be included as part of an overall comprehensive OT cybersecurity management regime. That is the only way, in my opinion, to provide a real and sustained protection of OT environment against cyber threats. With that, I will open the forum for questions. Feel free to send your questions on the Q&A part that you see on your screen, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. All right, so we've started receiving the questions. There's one question that says, a new asset should be introduced into service as part of change management under asset management. Is it correct assumption? Yes, and the way I understand, so the process should be that, let's say you need to add a workstation to the control systems network, or you need to even replace a switch in a control systems network, an Ethernet switch. You should follow a change management process under the asset management regime. So you would have the original switch part number, serial number, the original switch configuration, and you would first document that you will be replacing it with a different switch, even if it's like for like, even if it is the same brand, same model, but it's a different serial number. It could have a different firmware. So you would document what changes you're making, and then of course you would go out and implement the change, and then come back and you would document the change, you would get it approved first, then implement it, and then come back and confirm that the new change or the new device has been implemented. So another question says, do we have any tools for managing asset discovery versus asset management in OT environment? So I'm guessing for asset discovery, there are lots and lots of tools out there. Some are more focused for IT environment. I'm not going to name a lot of them because there's just too many, and I don't want to offend anybody. But there are many tools that are more focused on the IT side, typically a flat network where the tool would just go out on the network, do a scan, and provide you a decent asset inventory. There are OT-specific tools as well, which do both passive and active scanning and give you a good, decent asset discovery. From asset management perspective, there are a few that are coming up. There are many IT asset management tools, but they're not necessarily aligned with this MOC concept of the OT environment. But there are some upcoming. I see more and more companies focusing on asset management side of the OT. So there are software that are coming out in the market. All right, another question says, if any change of inventory or any other key information relevant to asset discovery that needs to be updated is incorporated in management of change process for OT, and the one-time requirement of asset discovery, which relatively requires less effort and periodic tasks. Why asset discovery cannot be integrated? Absolutely. I think that you and if I missed that in my presentation, I'll reiterate it. In fact, it's written on the slide right now that asset discovery plays a very important part in the overall cybersecurity management framework. Just don't use it as a replacement for asset management. So if, for example, I'll go back to the previous slide where we talked about, let me clean it up a little bit. Right here, this part, and even this part. So it should be asset discovery should be used but in conjunction with an overall asset management framework. You should use this to build your initial inventory. It's a pain if you want to do it manually. Let's say you're using Excel as an asset management tool. I wouldn't recommend it, but let's say you are. Building all of your asset inventory manually is a nightmare. So why not use any asset discovery tools that you have to collect all the information and put it in the asset management, but then use asset management as the master. Keep updating it with more information as you get it, and then use the asset discovery to validate it. Hey, my system says that computer number ABC XYZ with the IP address this has this MAC address. Oh, I did a network scan using the discovery tool, and I see something else out there. So that's exactly the idea, that asset discovery should be used in conjunction with asset management. What else? There are some more questions about, are there any tools available in the market? The answer is yes, there are several tools available. We'd be happy to work with you. Asset Solution doesn't own any of the tools because we are a solution provider. We work with almost all leading technology providers out there in the market. So we work with a few companies which provide very comprehensive asset management software, and we'd be happy to work with you to provide those solutions. I usually don't like to mention these in the webinar because this is going to go on the YouTube. And like I said, I don't want to. We partner with almost all leading technology providers. So if I name one company and miss the other one, I don't want to offend my friends there. So if you have any questions regarding specific tools, please contact us separately, and we'll be happy to work with you to provide a solution that actually works for you. So it's not like one solution fits all. Every company is different. Every OT environment is different. So we can provide you a solution that is tailor-made for your organization. Another question, does asset management play any role after a change is implemented? Absolutely. Asset management is basically my baseline. Any information that I need about my assets, about my environment, I would go with asset management. For example, on the screen you see something called life cycle tracking, governance and life cycle tracking. And if I combine this with the next word over here, proactive. So I would want to ask this question to my asset management system, which firmware are obsolete, for example, or which software will be, or which hardware will be end of life in the next 1 year, for example. This is a proactive approach, that I have a network switch, an Ethernet switch, which will be end of life or end of support, let's say in December of 2025. I'd like to ask this question to my asset management system, that give me a list of all the devices that are out there which will be end of support in, let's say, by end of 2025. And then I can proactively plan. I can get budgets approved. Nobody gives you budget in 6-8 months, but still, you can try and get budgets approved and launch a project so that you can find a replacement or get a replacement device, replacement equipment before the current one is out of support. So life cycle tracking, governance, even just a basic information about where do I stand in terms of, I asked this question, it's a little bit beyond asset management, but so which user has access to which asset and what type of access they have? It all comes down to the asset management. If I don't have this information, if I don't have the accurate asset inventory and accurate documentation of, let's say, the user and user ID and the access level, it's practically impossible for me, or very, very difficult for me to protect my OT environment. So going back, then yes, the asset management is more than just asset inventory. I would rely on it as my go-to system for anything related to assets. And yes, I will also use asset discovery tool to validate that whatever is documented as built in my asset management system is the same as what is installed in the actual environment. All right, another one says using third-party tools, and I really appreciate very good questions coming up, and we can. That's why we left significant time for questions and answers. I don't know if I can get to all of them, but I'm trying to get to as many as possible within the allocated time. Using third-party tools on DCS stations with fear on interfering with the functionality of stations is not easily accepted. What third-party asset discovery tools are well accepted and approved by vendors like Yokogawa, Foxtrot, and Delta V, SRL? That's a touchy topic. You're going to get me in trouble, whoever asked this question. You're going to get me in trouble with my friends in Yokogawa, Foxtrot, and Emerson and all. So yes, these companies, they don't like third-party discovery tools. Let me just repeat the question for everybody else's information. The question is that, is it allowed, is it acceptable to install or use third-party asset discovery tools on systems from, for example, Yokogawa, Foxtrot, and Delta V? Because these vendors don't like such third-party discovery tools. They prefer that you use their tools for their own DCS. That's true, and to some extent, I think it's okay because they have to make sure that their system operates the way it is supposed to. If these DCS systems, for example, are quite complex, if you run some kind of third-party tool or install third-party software on their system, and the system stops performing the way it is supposed to, that's a big risk for the industrial facility, and of course for these companies, because their reputation is at stake. So it's their reluctance to allow third-party systems on their assets is understandable. The reluctance of end users to allow active scanning for network discovery on the network is also understandable, because at the end of the day, they don't want any kind of disruption on their plants. We all know that availability is the king in industrial environment. You run a scan and cause a shutdown, you will be out of the door the next minute. So a lot of these end clients also feel reluctant in allowing third-party tools on the network. Generally, passive discovery is more accepted by end clients, and even by some of these DCS vendors. They have started opening up to passive discovery tools as well. I will not name any tools, like I stated before, but it is possible to do asset discovery on DCS environments. It is possible to do asset discovery on industrial facilities. I have personally done it. But whether you use asset discovery or not, the message is don't forget the asset management part. Focus on asset management first, and then think of what discovery tools are compatible. You may use multiple tools, some from the DCS vendors, some from third parties. But if you have a central asset management solution, you can pull information from different tools and still have a comprehensive asset management. Can asset discovery tools identify instruments and their configurations? And I'm assuming you mean field instrumentation like transmitters and control valves and all. Almost 99% of the cases, the answer is no, because most, unless you're using some kind of a field bus like foundation field bus or any kind of IP-based instrumentation, these field instruments will not even be accessible. Most asset discovery tools, the way we see them, is they're based on Ethernet network and IP network traffic, and maybe sometimes even TCP or UDP, depending upon what technology you're using. So if your field instrument is not even connected to an Ethernet type network, then the asset discovery tool will not be able to get to it. In some cases, if you already have an instrument management system installed on your network, which is communicating with the field devices, let's say on HART or other field buses, you may be able to connect with that instrument management system and get the inventory and other parameters. All right, I think we have time for a couple of more questions. Most questions are focusing on the tools part. Do we have any tools out there? And I'll reiterate that yes, there are tools out there. Connect with us outside this webinar, and we'll be happy to understand your requirements first, understand your environment, which systems are installed, which DCS, which type of OEM, and then recommend tools both for asset discovery as well as for asset management that work for you. So we'll leave it at that. I think it was a very